Thank you, Graham and CyberArk, for that wonderful industry perspective. I'm now happy to kick off this final panel for the day on IoT and national security. My name is Melissa Harris, and I'm a staff writer and researcher with GovernmentCIO Media. Here with me is Katerina Megis, NIST Cybersecurity for IoT Program Manager. We also have Vincent Sritapan, CISA Cyber Quality Service Management Office Section Chief, and Sean Frazier, Federal CSO of Okta. Thank you all for being here with us today. So off the bat, you're all experts in cybersecurity, and given the myriad of cyber challenges we face today, how does IoT fit into the picture, and how are each of you approaching security challenges around IoT or connected devices? Kat, do we want to start with you?
Sure. So perhaps I can give a little bit of an overview as far as the work that we're doing at NIST, and kind of to explain to folks, because I'm not sure everybody knows who NIST is. We are a non-regulatory bureau within the Department of Commerce, but when it comes to cybersecurity, NIST is responsible to, under FISMA, to put out guidelines for federal agencies around cybersecurity. So when we stood up the program around 4.5 years ago, the resounding message was, please don't reinvent the wheel when it comes to IoT. There's lots of good existing guidelines. The RMS applies. The cybersecurity framework applies. Help us understand how we might have to adapt those existing risk management frameworks rather than looking to reinvent the wheel. So we started out initially with focusing on how does IoT introduce new challenges for agencies and new risks in managing their cybersecurity risks. And we published that in a interagency report 8228. But the resounding takeaway as well out of the work on that was, while federal agencies had existing risk management frameworks, there was certain dependencies on the IoT device, and agencies weren't always aware of the requirement or the need to manage those risks that arise out of using IoT. Federal agencies weren't always aware of how they might have to adapt or change how they approach cybersecurity because of IoT and some of the limitations around IoT. And third of all, we walked away with the understanding that in some cases, federal agencies were acquiring IoT devices. And once they had brought those IoT devices into their environment, they realized that there was really no good way to mitigate risk because there was some dependency on some functionality that IoT device could provide. So that's kind of when we changed our perspective, and we said, well, there's really good guidelines out there on how to manage system risk. How can we kind of break that down to the component level and give federal agencies an understanding of what an IoT device that is a component of a larger system might have to provide in terms of security in order to provide those kind of higher level security controls. And at around the same time, an executive order 13800 came out, and NIST, working through Department of Commerce and with DHS, were tasked with providing a report to the White House on the mitigation of botnet attacks and how to secure federal agencies. And IoT devices were identified as a core area in that strategy as needing some guidelines and some guidance on IoT security. And that was not just federal government focused, but there was a recognition that the vulnerabilities in IoT devices actually had a far-reaching impact. So we started this focus working on devices. We developed what we call a core baseline, which is identifying what we saw as the core capabilities that should be provided by any IoT device, regardless of market, whether you were looking to use that IoT device in critical infrastructure, in consumer, in federal agencies, and enterprise. And we published that, and we've seen it's NIST IR 8259 for those of you that might be interested. 8259 recommends the activities that we would like to see manufacturers undertake, A and B, focus on what do we think are the characteristics or the capabilities that should be in those IoT devices. And then most recently, the IoT Cybersecurity Improvement Act of 2020 was passed, which directs federal agencies to comply with guidelines published by NIST that would impact or affect any sort of acquisition that an agency might do around IoT devices. So we're taking that core baseline, 8259A and B. We are adapting that to federal agencies. There was a draft that was published, special publication 800-213. That was out for public comments. We've incorporated those comments, and we are in the kind of final stretch here. So in the next month or two, federal agencies should be seeing some more detailed guidelines around how to look at IoT devices and how to derive the baseline or the requirements for those IoT devices that would then get built into their acquisition process and the rest of their risk management processes.
That's fantastic.
So lots going on.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Yeah. How about Vincent?
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so definitely appreciate it. As far as, how does IoT fit within the context of cyber and what we're looking at, you really have to think about, what do we use IoT for today, right? IoT, traditionally, your sensor-based system really has that impact to the physical world, right? And so, for example, if you think about IoT itself, it's really about integrity and availability. When those pieces, especially around availability, don't work, right, and it doesn't, confidentiality is usually left last, right? And so when you think about, is this something where the impact to a thermostat, right, a smart thermostat, or other aspects of supply chain, when we think about our physical systems, this is something where IoT does have a significant impact. I'll note that, if you think about the uniqueness and the distribution of how many sensors are out there in the world, think about in 2016, Mirai botnet and the impact it had there, sort of large scale, what the concerns are, sort of low grade security. You also can think about more recent ones, right? CISA issued, a warning about bad ALEC in this case, right? With real-time operating systems really having an impact for a set of vulnerabilities there for both IoT and cyber physical systems across a variety of sectors, right? Every aerospace, robotics, rail, industrial control systems. So IoT in the context of cyber has a significant impact. I'll note for CISA and sort of how we're taking this, same with Kat, right? I'll say that the technical guidance, those contributions are important. There are their aspects. So technical guidance is one. There's other aspects of supply chain risk management. How do we look at this? A lot of you look on IoT, a lot of the software is built on open source and other, underlying technologies, of which you don't even know that the vulnerability is applicable to you. So I will say that, supply chain risk management, how we apply this to acquisition is important. And then your traditional cyber hygiene, regardless of the guidance, the acquisition, cyber hygiene is always applicable. So if you think about, as long as there are patches appropriate, keeping that patch, the IoT up to date if you can, right? Or you can think about other technical controls, if you think about technical guidance where we think about network micro-segmentation, right? Maybe we don't have those controls within the IoT device. So there's a variety of things you can look at from cyber hygiene, supply chain risk management, and then technical guidance overall. But very much IoT is here. It is relevant. If you think about, I'll just say 5G, 6G as we go forward, that human machine integration will be something that IoT now really needs to be secured because it'll have an impact on everyday life. It already does, but even more so in the future.
That's so true.
I tend to think of things from the other perspective. For me, I think of it kind of data protection and least privilege from devices. I look at myself, right? I live at home. I got 30 devices on my network. When the pandemic hit, my home became a branch office for Okta. So figure multiply 30 times 5,000 employees we have. What is that? 150,000 devices that now Okta has to worry about in their infrastructure. So, oh, by the way, one of them is a refrigerator from Korea. I don't know if you've ever tried to patch a refrigerator. It's not an easy thing to do. So we have to make sure that we're building in kind of this least privileged mindset around data protections, realizing there's going to be all kinds of stuff around us trying to get access to it. If my refrigerator tries to access my Gmail, I got a problem, right? So that's something where I need multi-factor authentication. That's something where I need that detection to be able to say, okay, the refrigerator is in the refrigerator box. It is not supposed to have access to my email. So it's this whole kind of zero trust mindset, which I fully believe in my home as a good steward of security to Okta as a branch office now, not just an employee, but a branch office now that we're all working from home and have dynamic telework. So as Vincent points out, this is only going to get worse. We're only going to add more and more devices to our network. Some of them we'll have control over and we can patch them and we can make sure they're secure, but a lot of them we won't. So we're going to make sure that we're focused on kind of the least privileged access to the data, and the devices swirling around is just like Vincent pointed out. We're going to be on networks that we don't even own anymore in 10 years, right? We're not going to have any control over the networks. We're not going to have any control over the things that are connected to it. So what do we focus on? The things we can control. It's that access to the data.
So true. Kat, I wanted to go back to you real quick. You were talking about many of the standards that you've been working on, and I wanted to focus on how you've been working on publishing federal guidelines around IoT security in response to last year's IoT Cybersecurity Improvement Act. Can you sort of go more into the state of overall guidance around federal IoT security before the act, and generally how this guideline development is going and how it'll make a difference for the federal security space?
Sure. So the way we look at guidelines for federal agencies, and the top level message is, FISMA and the RMS all are still applicable. Lots and lots and lots of the existing processes, policies that federal agencies have in place are all still, broadly applicable, and we encourage agencies to continue to use those. And yes, it is not a one-size-fits-all solution. That is going to require the entire ecosystem. There's pieces and parts to this that go beyond just the guidelines under the IoT Improvement Act. It's implementing and looking at zero trust technology. We have work at NIST where we're looking at something called the manufacturer's usage description, which would allow an IoT device to actually announce its intent and signal kind of what's its intent, so that routers or other appliances that are sitting on the network can look at that and say, hey, guess what? My refrigerator should not be talking to my thermostat, or my light bulb should potentially not be talking to one of my systems here that are on my extended perimeter related to my business home office. So it is not a one-size-fits-all, and it's not a single silver bullet, but a piece of it is around this, helping agencies understand that as you are acquiring IoT devices, it is helpful to be asking the manufacturer for certain things. And the way we look at it is there's two types of information. There's the technical and the technical capabilities, and we've recommended a technical baseline, which consists of 7 top-level capabilities, and I won't go into depth on what those are. If you're interested, those documents were out for public comment, so they're out on the public, at least as far as what the drafts are. And then we also have a set of what we call non-technical capabilities, and we're recommending that federal agencies ask manufacturers for that information, and that information includes things like what sort of documentation do you have in place? Do you have policies for certain things in place, or documented policies? Do you have a process for collecting information, like collecting information on known vulnerabilities? Do you have a process in place for how you disseminate information around things like vulnerabilities? So right now we're in the process of taking the feedback on what we call the adaptation of the core baseline to suit federal agencies. But I do also want to say that one of the resounding messages you'll see in the final document, which depending on internal reviews should be out in the next couple of months, the final version, is that we always put this in the context of a risk management framework. So while we are articulating a recommended minimum set as per the IoT Cybersecurity Improvement Act, that is always intended to sit within a broader risk management approach. And we really encourage federal agencies to go through their risk management processes, understand the environment, understand how the IoT device is going to change perhaps the risk profile. And then we provide them with a catalog that we encourage them to use beyond just the baseline. We would like them to actually also look at the catalog and say, well, you know, based on my environment, based on my appetite for risk, based on, you know, how I'm going to implement the RMS and the baselines in the RMS, I may actually be dependent on the manufacturer providing me with certain things beyond what is articulated in the notional baseline. So right now we're hoping that the draft will be out, or the final will be out shortly. And obviously we're coordinating across OMB, who also has a role in the IoT Cybersecurity Improvement Act, and working with federal agencies to ensure that their policies comply with the new guidelines that we're publishing. And obviously there's also been discussions with GSA as we're looking at potentially how the FAR may have to be updated to reflect these changes to guidelines. So keep your eyes open. You should be seeing that hopefully, if fingers crossed, hopefully in the next 4 or 6 weeks.
Well, it sounds like you have your hands full, but thank you for that and for that insight. Speaking of having hands full, Vincent, you sort of have your hands all over a lot of different areas across CISA. So not only do you have a lot of background in IoT, but also mobile security, zero trust, and cloud. So can you go, you know, you're also talking about how IoT is just, you know, something where it's going to be expanding our attack surface and just general threats that we could see. So can you go into how security challenges in these other areas that you sort of focus on overlap, and what security approaches we should start taking for all or each of them? Oh, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, if you think about IoT, mobile, cloud, zero trust, right? I'll say, you know, if you think about IoT more and more today, there's significant benefits there, right? That we have that offers great, and we can talk about more about that. But the key thing here is that you're seeing more and more dependency on cloud computing, right? For sort of pushing that off and actually leveraging the cloud to do cloud compute and just compute function. This sort of brings us that ability to connect, but also leverage the best of breed. You also, when you think about mobile, so if, for example, it's not connected online, you know, through your router or whatever access point at home or other places, then traditionally you're going to have that connection to fall back to a mobile device, right? It could be through a mobile application. It could be, you know, a variety of methods that you would connect. And then the last aspect of zero trust, right? When we think about where these networks lie, the types of controls we have for you know, both technically, the abilities of, you know, think about, well, hey, what happens? It's a, you know, low cost IoT device, which is really great. To think of an easy example could be, you know, use of energy efficiency, right? Smart thermostat I mentioned, that gives us the benefit of things like, oh, well, it could help with energy, right? Climate control within the United States or around the globe. It also could help with resiliency for the electric grid. But at the same time, if malicious, you know, bad actors, bad things could occur in that IoT device, it also could be used and have that opposite effect, right? So there are concerns in security challenges associated to that. I do think that, you know, things related to cloud security, I can tell you we are working on that as a part of, you know, I would say as a part of the more, you know, secure cloud business applications project we have here within CISA. So this is, you know, everything from your M365, Google Workspace, all those other pieces, but cloud in general, you know, with the CyberScape has that cloud security reference architecture that we're pushing out. Additionally, I'll say that, you know, zero trust, those aspects of that, how we would leverage, you know, 5G in the future, all those things built in sort of underlying are going to be critical for us. So I'll leave it at that, because I know Sean probably has more pieces of zero trust to talk about.
I have lots of opinions, Vincent. You know this. So you think about, I mean, cloud and mobile are like peas and carrots. Very little happens on a mobile device that isn't in the cloud. I mean, if you take a mobile device and look at the data that's stored on there, the chances of you finding something that's there that's not somewhere in the cloud is pretty slim. So protecting of that device, super important, right? And I mean, if the device is jailbroken or something's going on, do you really care unless it connects up to an application where I care about it? If the user jailbroke it and then just does personal stuff and plays games with it, I don't really care so much about it. But what I do care about is I care about protecting the data endpoint on the other side of that mobile device from malicious actors coming in and sucking the data out of the cloud. So that's where cloud and mobile kind of play, have a real symbiotic relationship with regards to protection. And I love Kat's point that no system is created equal, because that's absolutely true, right? You've got kind of critical infrastructure systems, you've got weapon systems, which are critical infrastructure, and then you have other systems that are not at that end of the spectrum. So part of this journey, this zero trust kind of mindset shift is having good knowledge of what you're protecting and where. Right, you can't abdicate your security responsibility and your understanding and your awareness of your environment and understanding if this is critical data. I really care deeply about this, and I'm going to put all kinds of gates around this and all kinds of friction to get access to it. If it's not as critical, then I might not focus on that, because I've only got so many resources to pay attention to things. I may focus more over here and less over here, right? Because it's always a battle of where do I spend my time and my resources, because there's a lot of stuff to do. And having that level of focus, having that level of understanding of your environment is critical to making those decisions.
Great. And obviously, you know, we can't end today without talking about, you know, how IoT sort of fits into national security, since that's the topic of today's event. So how does IoT fit into national security, and what national security challenges can you see coming in the future as we become more connected, as we've been talking about today, and how can we mitigate those sort of security challenges? Does anyone want to start? How about Vincent? I'll call on you.
Yeah, no problem. I mentioned this earlier. I didn't remember the question, but I'll say, you know, IoT and just the usage of it, right? The benefits we get in the sense of energy efficiency that's there. That's just an easy one. But keep in mind the context of, you know, whether that's a resiliency to the electric grid, impacts on climate change, all the different aspects where you think of, well, it's just IoT, but the applications that we do have, right, for us today are quite massive, and they'll be even more so going forward. I will say, though, that, you know, the concerns, right, so the fact that, you know, even if the fallback is onto, if the fallback is to a mobile device or other networks, you have to think about where, with this IoT device, you know, how is it maintained, how is it connected? I'll say you have plenty of IoT devices. What happens if, you know, you think, oh, I do cyber hygiene, I can figure out how to patch my refrigerator, right? That's awesome. But what happens if that manufacturer no longer exists? Then what do you do, right? There's quite a lot of aspects in which you have to think about the state, right? You can follow technical guidance and other aspects, but think about, well, do I segment my network differently? There are aspects of national security that IoT really makes a difference in our world, because it has physical impacts, right? And I do think that, you know, just like it can benefit if cyber, you know, or malicious activities do occur, it could also have that negative effect. But I'll go ahead and stop there.
Yeah, I think what I'll add is, you know, because we're going to stick to my refrigerator analogy, is, you know, what is the risk of my refrigerator being hacked, right? If someone can hack my refrigerator and figure out that I need to change my water filter, I don't care. But if they can hack my refrigerator and use that as a jumping off point to get access to other data parts and data elements in my network, then I have deep concern about that. So again, I'm thinking more about the data that I care about, the things that I care about being protected. And if the refrigerator is trying to get access to that, I need to know that and have mitigations to protect against that.
Sure. Kat?
Oh, I was going to say I completely agree with Sean. One of our you know, common fallback stories that we talk about is I'm sure lots of the audience is familiar with the events of a few years ago with the smart thermostat in the casino. And while the thermometer in the fish tank in itself as a use case, when you looked at it objectively, if you only looked at the use case and you said, well, the risk associated with this thermometer inside a fish tank that's sitting out on the casino floor is really minimal security, but what it provided that jumping off point for a lateral attack within the casino's network and allowed them access to their financial systems right on the back end. So as we're seeing this increased connectivity they just attack surface is just, growing exponentially.
Right. And, one thing that we've heard about threat today and just in general recently is how cybersecurity is often talked about as a team effort, not just within an organization, but across agencies. Even here, you have all touched upon that a little bit. So how are you collaborating with different partners, whether it's federal, industry, or academic, to realize better standards management and practices around IoT security? Sean, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, I can. I'll give a big shout out to Vincent and his crowd at CISA, because I think, having CISA there and helping kind of be the connective tissue between industry and public sector has been hugely important and helpful, and has only gotten better in the last 3 or 4 years that they've been around. But it is a team sport. We look at and someone on the earlier panel said this, right? As you look at the attackers are all affiliates, right? They're all sharing information. They're sharing attack techniques. They're sharing tools. They're doing all this stuff. And for us to not do that on the other side, being defenders, is just kind of silly and really kind of short-sighted. So I think we're starting to see a lot more collaboration now. When I started this journey in cybersecurity 20 years ago, and I got the gray beard to prove it, everyone had their own silos and everyone kind of did their own thing. And it was almost like you wouldn't want to share the information because it was risky to do that. And we've kind of coming out of that on the other side, where we're now realizing that the sharing of information is an important defense mechanism, not risky behavior.
Yeah, I'll just add, as Sean mentioned, CISA does have an ICT supply chain risk management task force, both with industry, other government entities working those efforts. It does play in a role towards the acquisition piece, working with GSA and others. So definitely CISA does have that key role. I'll also note that I happen to co-chair the Federal Mobility Group underneath the FedCIO Council on behalf of DHS, also co-chaired by GSA and NIST. But the key thing is here, it's a group that has about 45 departments and agencies, 200 to 400 members now, depending on which day of the week. But we've been around for quite some time, where we share and work on common challenges together, look at how we can enable using mobility, IoT, others, and really looking at security, acquisition, 5G, mission enablement. So if you talk about government folks wanting to connect, the Federal Mobility Group, you can find that on CIO.gov, is one method.
Great. And Kat?
So standards is in the title of NIST. So I guess I can't, leave this conversation without talking a little bit about the value of standards. And we are very actively engaged in standards. And I like to highlight for people kind of where we see the value of standards are, especially voluntary standards that adhere to kind of the principles of being transparent and consensus-based and allowing for open membership, is by working in an international standards space. One, you really get to bring all the voices to the table, right? And who better, we're better to have kind of a conversation and define the best approach to something than in a body where you can have not just government at the table, but you have the manufacturers, you have the organizations that actually have to use the devices, you have the security researchers, you have the solution providers, and everyone really comes to the table and is able to develop, maybe multiple standards, recognizing that one size doesn't fit all, but being able to create actually a marketplace of viable standards with multiple approaches to solving a problem, we think is really part of the solution. And second of all, if you do this work in an international space, one of the things we quickly identified is the threat to national security. Actually, when you looked at, and I keep going back to Mirai, there's been lots of examples since Mirai, but what really struck me was when I saw the map that actually showed where the devices were globally, that were actually weaponized and were actually used to target U.S.-based targets. Many of them were not even within the U.S. So there is really the cybersecurity challenge isn't really just here within the U.S. We could try to improve the state of IoT and improve the state of IoT devices in the U.S. But if we don't really approach this on a global scale, we're not going to be able to solve the problem. And by doing that in an international standard space, it really encourages others and other nations to kind of adopt and meet this international standard. So we've taken our work and we have we've provided it as contributions, and we are actively engaged in a lot of these international standards bodies. So that's my plug for the S and NIST. Yeah.
I was a little remiss for not calling out NIST as good partners as well, and also their other sub-agency, the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, which is another great place for partnership, similar to what the good work that Vincent is doing in the CIO Council, where they're getting a collaboration between public and private, partnership going. So yeah, another strong one. 2 thumbs up for those folks.
Thank you. Thank you for reminding me about the NCCOE, Sean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it looks like we're all out of time. And thank you all so much again for being here today and sharing your work and insight, and really just wrapping up this event with a great conversation. So with that, I'll now pass the program back over to Amy Kleber to close out today's event.